about any single image, feel free to ask those questions. We don't necessarily have to wait till the end to do that because it's sometimes harder to go back. So if you do have questions, please, please go ahead and ask them. So I do think about light a lot when I'm traveling, you know, especially if you're driving along and you're seeing changes in the environment and the lighting. It may force you to stop or you may want to stop and take some pictures. So I'm trying to make my images more beautiful, more meaningful, tell stories. So light is a huge component of that. So the way, I don't know why that happens, but anyway, the way we, my wife and I, like to travel is that we like to get somewhere kind of as quickly as possible and then sort of camp out, so to speak, and travel away from a sort of a base camp idea. And we do this whether we're traveling internationally. This was a trip we did last January in the middle of winter to the Lofoten Islands in Norway. And there we rented a car and spent most of our time in one place, and we just drove around the Lofoten Islands. And we'll do the same thing with our trailer when we go. It's why I bought a trailer instead of an RV. It's because I wanted to unhitch and then go drive around and spend time in the place that we're staying. So because we take that approach, it gives me a lot of time and multiple days to see the light. So travel is about experiences. It's about stories that we want to share. And including recognizable elements in your travels really helps a lot. Things like cars or you know, whatever you're traveling in really helps put the viewer into the spot. Roads are really important in traveling. So making images that show roads. Now, you may have already figured this out, but what makes this image a travel shot and not a picture of a California tarantula is the road and the vehicle. So by including those in the picture, I'm able to tell a lot more of a story rather than just the spider. Boats, you know, and boats are usually very beautiful, and the bow is probably the most popular place to include in your pictures, but it can be any part of a boat. Just the idea that you're on the boat makes the scene you're photographing so much more meaningful to the viewer because it allows us to put ourselves on the boat. And people, even very small in the frame, if you include a person in the picture, it helps us place ourselves in the scene. So this was in Norway, obviously. And they don't have to be small. They can be the subject, essentially. But by including the map here, it gives us, this is our guide, and it gives us a sense of where we're, you know, the next picture would show you what he's pointing at. So it can help tell the story that way. I'm going to try and throw out some of my technical stuff as we go along. And you'll probably start noticing with shots like this, I'm using flash fill a lot. Whenever I photograph, certainly people, I like to get close to them a lot of times, and I'm going to throw some flash fill on there. I don't want it to be noticeable, and that's the key. It should just, you know, be there. So, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. When traveling with non-photographers, my wife's not a photographer, although everybody's a photographer now, but you know what I mean. When traveling with non-photographers, you have to remember that they want to eat and drink. Excuse me, what happened there? Oh yeah, eat and drink when the light is like this. So you have to resist this as much as possible. It's not easy sometimes. You need to go find the light and come back to that. It's not always possible, but I think by being aware of the light, you can sort of anticipate those opportunities. Well, I'm going to be a little late. Then when you get back, you can go ahead and photograph the food and stuff. So let me talk about this shot just a little bit. This is in Brazil. Most of the images in the presentation are here in California. There's a few, obviously I had Norway, this is Brazil. But one of the things that makes this image successful is that the white table underneath is bouncing light up into the glasses. So that really helps make this picture work. I do a lot of food photography when I travel, and most of it is the food that it's like my plate. It's the food I'm eating. And I do have some little kit things that I carry. I think you can see this. This is a little foil reflector I made out of some tin foil and cardboard. I also have some professional ones, some little circle ones that I bought. And then this thing, many of you may be aware of this thing. It's called a plamp, P-L-A-M-P. It's designed to hold plants from blowing in the wind, but it'll hold anything. So I always carry this, primarily for food photography, but it's good for macro as well. And then I have these little soft boxes that I can throw on my flash or my LED. I use a lot of LEDs now. I have some really small ones and they work really well. I'm actually being lit by LEDs. But I carry those for food and macro and even portrait. You could even use this as a portrait, head and shoulder shot. So I do have these little kits that I take with me. And all of these food shots were taken with these types of tools when I'm traveling. These are all travel. So I'm using them to fill in the shadows and things. Okay, and this comes from, you kind of have to put this in perspective. I'm coming from a commercial photography background where eco lodges were an important client of mine, and they always wanted pictures of their food. So I kind of had to do it as part of my job, but I still do it a lot. And I really enjoy the food photography. Okay, so the qualities of light, that's a term that came from Brooks, but it's a good one to use. So I want to talk a little bit about the qualities of light that I'm aware of when I'm traveling. First off, I don't know how many times you've been in the Coast Redwoods or in some place where this happens, where these beams of light come down. I mean, I've camped, traveled in the Coast Redwoods for 20 years, probably a little more. And I'm pretty sure I've only seen this really good a couple of times. So it's not common. And the weather has to, the fog has to come in, then the sun has to break, can't be too late in the day. So when something like this happens in the film days, I would just go through roll after roll with every lens I had. Today, I'm just using every lens I've got and trying to create as many images as possible because it's just not going to last that long. And the chance of seeing it again is pretty slim, apparently. So I like to take advantage of this. And this is where you cannot rely on your camera to tell you the exposures and things like that. And many times you have to use a tripod. It's actually quite dark. So this is where knowing your tools and maybe practicing closer to home or something can really make this pay off. I know one of the first times I did this, I had my 70-200 on a tripod, and I was shooting at a 1/15th of a second. And I was shooting, it was digital, and when I put my camera on a tripod, I tend to turn off the image stabilization. It's not really needed. So when I got back and looked at my pictures on the computer, they weren't sharp. And so I did a little test with the image stabilizer and, at home, and it wouldn't have made any effect. So I did some homework, and I found out that in the film days, we had mirror slap. Well, we still in digital have a similar problem with these slower shutter speeds, especially with a DSLR. It does have a mirror, of course. The mirrorless don't, so they don't have this problem. But that mirror slap is at its maximum at 1/15th of a second. So if you shoot at 1 second, it looks sharp because the 1/15th of a second is such a small percentage of 1 second. If you shoot at a 60th of a second or a 1/25th, you don't see any. But at 1/15th of a second, the camera's moving. So there's lots of things to do to correct that. You know, you can use mirror lockup, use your self timer, use the shutter delay, lots of things in landscape photography to make sure you get a sharp picture. That was a hard lesson. Okay, so so let's talk about diffuse light. So this is soft light. This comes from generally cloud cover in nature. It can come from shaded environments, a cliff, you know, in a canyon, a cliff can provide soft light. A building can do soft light. And so this was taken in soft light. And there's a lot of subjects that don't work well in contrasty light. You know, the shadows are too dark. This was also taken with focus stacking, which I'm doing a lot now with my landscapes. So I made one focus exposure for the rock in the lower left. I focused then on the first tree on the right, and then on the second tree, separate exposures, and then on the back tree, and then on infinity. And then I blend those in Photoshop. It's really easy. It's an automatic thing if you've never done it. It's really easy. There's no masking involved or anything. So soft light, otherwise the shadows here would have not made this image work. And then certainly in post, you can pop the contrast a little bit. Overcast light tends to be a little bit blue, so you want to bring those colors back. But again, we're telling stories here as much as possible. So of the young sequoias against the older sequoias. This is in our local mountains here, not this spring, a couple of years ago. Again, this is in some overcasty kind of, you know, high overcast light. And it's what makes the picture for sure. This is overcast light, cloudy situation. And this wouldn't have worked at all in the sun. I would have had to totally change how I approached this whole scene. Shot with a longer lens, probably 200 millimeters. And the softness of everything comes from that low light. This is in the shade. There's a meadow on screen left. You can see the highlight in the marmots. What do you guys call these? Marmots? My dad used to call them whistle pigs. But it's a marmot. And I literally walked down the trail and came around a corner and he popped out and looked at me for a little while. So the open area where the meadow is providing the bright light, the key light. And then the camera right is the shadowed area. But this is in the shade, so I don't have to worry about high contrast problems. Okay, hard light. In other words, no clouds, full on sun. A lot of people tend not to take pictures during this time of day, so to speak. And it's definitely different at different altitudes, the quality of hard light, and a different, you know, you go way up in the north and it looks different. It's probably has to do a lot with the sun being lower on the horizon in the polar areas or just northern areas. But here it's pretty much, well, in the equator, it's straight overhead. Here it's pretty much overhead. This is Sequoia. And I knew what people forget about hard light is that you can, it's called walking the subject. So you have a subject, it could be a person, and you walk around the subject and look at what the light is doing. Don't have them be still. So you can do the same thing with a tree or even an animal sometimes. But I knew I wanted to bring the texture out of this foreground. This was a fallen sequoia. And my wife was sitting down by that one big sequoia down there. It's great because she gives scale to the picture. The sun's kind of low in the afternoon and it's coming across the meadows. But by positioning myself here, I was able to get that sun to be kind of it's almost kind of 3/4 backlighting. And you can see where the shadows fall. So I'm able to bring that texture out in this. On an overcast day, I don't think this picture would have worked at all. So So you have to realize that there's no such thing as good light or bad light. There's either light or there's no light. So you have to kind of work it. This is bright sun, and I decided this is just right down by our Stearns Wharf. These are I think they're the Royal Terns. I did look them up. The Royal Terns, and they've started to leave now, I think. But they have all this color in them, and I knew that bright sunlight would probably work with them. I think overcast would work too. But I loved how this sunlight brought all the colors out. So if it was overcast, that blue water and blue sky in the background would be white. So it might not be as interesting. It's taken with a 400 millimeter. Poppies, well, poppies don't even bloom until 10 o'clock in the morning on a sunny day, and then they close up at about 2. So you kind of have to shoot on a sunny day, midday, to get the poppies to start to open. But color, if you want color, then bright sun is the strongest color you can get. Okay, full bandwidth here. You know, all the colors are of light are striking the subjects. So you have to be a little careful with flowers and leaves. You know, they have a waxy coating on them that reflects light. And that's sometimes why people like to use polarizers, because it gets rid of those reflections. But if you front light the subject, you know, or top light or front light, you shouldn't have those reflection problems. How are we doing? Everybody okay?
Good.
All
yeah,
good.
I can't hear anything, so so it's kind of like an empty stadium, you know. But anyway, okay, so we're still on. Okay, so I want to talk about direction now. I've kind of talked about it a little bit with that fallen sequoia tree. So flat light versus directional light. By flat light, what we mean is front light. You know, the light in this case for these ruins down in the southwest, the light is right over my shoulder, basically, striking the ruins. And it's very two-dimensional. It looks like somebody could have cut that out and pasted it on the blue sky. And that's what happens with front lighting, where it becomes it's not that the light is flat, there's just no shadows. So, so the directional light adds dimension and motivates the composition. So this is early in the morning, and I started shooting. I took this picture, and then I immediately I already knew, but I knew I wanted to go over to the right and get some shadows so that I had dimension. And part of that, because I had the shadows, it dictated the composition. So using the same lens as I used on the last one, but I knew I wanted this, you know, this wall coming in gave me, you know, it's all this linear movement through the frame. And, you know, first of all, I want to say that, you know, I don't really think about that kind of stuff that much when I'm shooting. It's sort of intuitive. I think it's intuitive for everybody, you know. No matter how much photography you do, I think it's still intuitive that, oh, this looks really cool, you know. And you don't have to analyze why it looks cool. You can do that when you get back, because when you do that, then you'll remember, and the next time you go, it'll just be automatic for you to wander around. So I don't want you to think that, oh, I pre-planned the shot and, you know, I thought about it all day long and I realized what I wanted. Nah, sometimes that happens, but not very often. I just walked around to the other side there and I said, this looks much cooler. I mean, I did know that the shadows would help. So shadows are super important. So again, this is up by Los Osos, up by Morro Bay, the little road called Turry Road. And what I liked, I saw the shot before. I used to live up there before without this shadow, but when I was driving down that road at this time, I saw the shadow. I said, that makes the shot, you know, the shadow makes the shot. So again, a longer lens and everything and stacking things up. So shadows are, how should I say this? You can't have light without shadows. Backlighting. So this is kind of side backlighting, but whenever you have this fog, and this is just pulling over to the side of the road. Wow, look at that. That's cool looking. Getting out a longer lens. I think I used the 400 on this one. And then, you know, the fog's going to be lit by the sun. The trees are going to be isolated against dark shadowed backgrounds. And that's what makes those trees stand out. This is kind of one of my favorite shots, believe it or not. Again, it's really good at telling a story because you know where we are. We're in the sequoias. There's a fallen sequoia in the background. And then these two young mule deer were, you know, button heads a little bit. And then they stopped and looked at me. Well, they weren't looking at me, actually. They were looking at other people in the meadow. Excuse me. But they were right on the edge of the sun. I knew that there was a good picture here. It's just a picture of them butting heads and just eating were totally boring. So it's the point of waiting. It doesn't always work, but if you don't wait, you're going to get a picture that you really don't want to show anybody because it's boring, even though you had everything right, but they had their heads down in the grass. So I waited and was able to get the picture. And here again, they're being lit. The grass in the foreground in front of them is actually lighting them up so they're not a silhouette. So that's bouncing back in. And then I was able, and with probably a little bit of post work, I'm pretty sure I was able to bring the tree and the background shadows up a little bit. So if you don't have much to reflect light back, you're going to get a silhouette. And this is pretty close to a silhouette, excuse me. And this again, it's up at Piedras Blancas, the elephant seal rookery. It's really hard to shoot there, light-wise. You have to shoot, because it faces south, you know. So our sun is always in the southern sky. I should say it faces kind of southwest. Our sun's always in the southern sky because we're in the northern hemisphere. So a lot of times trying to shoot at our beach, you're always shooting, you know, into a backlit situation. So if you get up early enough though and get down there, you can start to get some light coming across the front of a lot of these elephant seals. So this is a big bull coming out of the water. You know, I spend 3 hours or 4 hours standing down there waiting for things to happen. It's also with a 400, and the timing with the birds was just perfect. So that's why this shot works so well. But again, remember, if you don't have anything to fill in the light on a backlit subject, you're just going to get a shape. That's what backlighting is good for, a shape. So if you have an interesting shape, backlight it. And then, of course, you need to take the second picture because there was the male, and then there's the mother and the young. And she's a little bit backlit too, just because of that positioning of that beach. But there's light bouncing around all over the place. As I mentioned earlier, leaves and flowers are translucent. Light goes through them. So anytime you can get backlighting, this is just laying down underneath the leaves and shooting up through the leaves. The leaves are going to look amazing because they're translucent. There's light coming through them. It's the prettiest way to photograph, I think, flowers and leaves and things. And then, you know, what makes the picture is the pattern. So I did notice the pattern of the leaves. I said, wow, that pattern's pretty cool, you know. And so I need to find perfect leaves. So I probably did a little bit of retouching on these leaves, very minor, just spots maybe. But I try not to spend too much time sitting in front of the computer. So I've spent time looking for good, clean leaves. And in the commercial photography world, when I was marketing my images, flowers and leaves and things had to be perfect. They just had to be perfect. Otherwise, no one would ever license them. So keep that in mind. Leaves and flowers, translucent backlighting. Okay, color. So this is the Alabama Hills, Eastern Sierras, Mount Whitney, and this was taken at 7:15 in the morning. So, and this is like I think a 200 millimeter lens, but 7:15 in the morning. The next picture was taken 15 minutes later. That's it, 15 minutes. Cool thing about digital, I can go over there and look and see what time I took it. This is a dramatic change in the color of the light. And this is how fast the color can change. The sunrise tends to change faster. I don't know why. And sunsets tend to change slower in terms of color. But this picture I really liked, you know, and this picture, it's okay. It's not anywhere near as good, I don't think, or as interesting, I should say. It's not that it's not good. Right here in Santa Barbara, I do have a few pictures here from Santa Barbara because this is a beautiful place. And color, you can see, you know, the color in the mountains. The sun is dropped low enough. It's just grazing across. It's not even hitting the boats here. So they're all kind of bluish. And there's a little school of bufflehead ducks, or a little flock of bufflehead ducks down there. But a lot of the light that you see on the mountains is actually reflected light from the clouds. So the clouds are providing a lot of color. So you can start shooting these scenes for quite a while, you know, over a good period of time and get a different image every time. And then don't forget that water is reflective, so it's going to reflect the sky. So then you can make a totally different, same place, same time, make a totally different image using the color of light and the reflections from water or whatever. Same lens, everything. Okay, one of the things to think about in forests or jungle, you know, again, we're traveling, so we might go to jungles and forests and places that aren't really where we live. But you have to realize that in both jungles and forests, you have essentially a green filter overhead. So regardless of whether it's sunny or cloudy or whatever, you have this green layer that's filtering all the light. So the light is green. And if you put a person in this picture, you'll see, or like with a white t-shirt, you'll see it. You'll see the green tinge. It certainly doesn't hurt when it's just the forest and the leaves because they're green. But it's something to keep in mind and to remember. You can certainly play with that in post a little bit or in your white balance settings. But just realize that light is filtering through whatever's above you. And that's why cloudy light is blue, because clouds are made of water and the sunlight's coming through. Okay, so this is the sun setting. There's actually no direct sunlight at all hitting, it's too cloudy on the horizon, hitting the scene that I have here of the lighthouse. And I wanted to emphasize the blueness of this, so I actually changed my white balance to tungsten. I'll do this a lot when I'm looking for moods from color. You know, I'll use my white balances to control that when I shoot. I don't have to do it in post then. You could do this in post, but an important thing to remember is white balance actually affects exposure. So it's good to get a proper white balance instead of fixing it later, or to use your white balance creatively and leave it at that. Because it does affect your exposure. And I did put the light in post. I put the light in the lighthouse because there's no light up there anymore. That's a hostel. You can go stay there. Okay. How are we doing? Okay, halfway. Okay. So my absolute favorite time to photograph on the West Coast of the US is wintertime, because weather has the most interesting light. So, you know, clouds fill the sky, the darkness and lightness, the rain, everything about winter storms I find fascinating regarding light. And there's not very many things prettier, certainly here on our coast, than a clearing winter storm. I don't know if you've ever lived in the Northwest, it never clears. It's just stormy all the time or cloudy all the time. But down here, our storms move in, do their stuff, and then move away. And it's that clearing winter storm that I think is so beautiful. The air is so clean. So whenever we have these storms, you know, I'll run down to the park down below my house, Shoreline Park, and then start photographing because it's amazing. Fog. Anytime there's fog, you know, it gives you a subject to shoot because fog's interesting, and we've had a lot of coastal fog recently, and it's pretty interesting when it starts to break up and the sun gets a little brighter. So it's changing all the time. This shot would be really boring without the fog, and the sun doesn't. This is Big Sur, and the sun doesn't get up over those mountains until 9:30, 10 o'clock. So it's not like it's early morning or anything. Other places you might have to get up early, but it's the fog here that makes the shot. Rain. If you shoot in the Northwest or in Alaska or British Columbia, this one was actually taken in British Columbia. You're going to get a lot of rain. And in other parts of the country, you'll get a lot of rain. So unless you just want to put the camera away, you're going to have to work with the rain. But I think rain is amazing to photograph in. It makes, you know, if you're into photographing cities and things like that when you travel, the rain cleans everything up. It makes all the streets shiny. It's really, really beautiful. It cleans the rocks, you know, things look greener, vegetation. And then if you can actually capture the rain as it's coming down, it gives so much texture and mood to the image. This is a black bear. And then clouds. I call them puffy whites, you know, these little puffy white clouds. Whenever there's puffy white clouds, you should really start to go out and photograph landscapes, because even in the middle of the day, puffy white clouds can make a scene absolutely beautiful. It was one of my favorite things in East Africa, because it's right on the equator, very close to the equator there. It's the same in the tropics. You get a lot of puffy white clouds. You get a lot of clouds, and it just fills the sky and makes the sky interesting. So I love these clouds in this shot. This is, again, the Eastern Sierras of Mount Whitney, taken from Alabama Hills. But of course, I'm always trying to tell a story and make a different image than I've seen before. So by putting the rock in the foreground, and you can see the light is coming from the left, so it's in the morning, and I'm still getting textures across the rock. So I wanted that. So this wouldn't work in midday very well at all. And those clouds would be gone. Light can be very creative. In other words, what it does to a scene can be very creative. So you have to be sort of sensitive to that, because it doesn't last long, because we're moving, you know, we're spinning, we're not stationary, the light angles change, and something could change in literally a couple of minutes. So this is just power lines. I was actually driving out to Anza Borrego Desert State Park, and this is that pass before you get into Palm Springs. And the light was doing this on the power lines. I mean, I had to pull over and take pictures. So, and then with a little bit of cropping and things, you clean it up and you make it, some people might look at it and go, well, what is that? But that's what it is power lines. So you can get a lot of creative ideas from looking at light differently. This isn't as much about light, but light was my motivation for this composition, because as you can see down in the lower part, the light got kind of boring. You know, it was a little bit, came up and the color all went away. I said, God, it's boring on those rocks, but the cloud was amazing. So I actually switched from my 200 to my 400, and I took this picture. It's, you know, it's interesting. It's certainly different. It's not the typical Mount Whitney shot. But the composition was dictated by the light. All right, so here, this is a puzzle. So now I can't hear you, but what is this?
Looks like a windshield to me.
Okay.
Somebody's camper van.
Okay, well, you're on the right track with it being something automotive. What it is a license plate. It's the Arizona, I think it's Arizona, Arizona license plate. And of course it's splattered in bugs. And then I just cropped out the license plate part of it. But, you know, sometimes I look at other photographers' work and I go, how did they even think about taking that picture? Where did that come from? And this is what I was trying to do with this. It was the middle of the day. There really wasn't much to do. I was in a parking lot. I don't know why. And I was just walking around and I saw the license plate and it was so covered in bugs. I immediately knew what I wanted to do with it. Crop it so that it looked like something, you know, that you wouldn't have noticed normally. So it reminds me of these pictures. I remember seeing these pictures of this person's soap and toothbrush and the faucet in some apartment in New York, and they had made a beautiful print of it and put it in the galleries, and they were super famous, and they sold it for $5,000. And I'm going, really, you know? But the thing is that they took a normal scene and created a very, very interesting picture from it. So this takes being aware, and that's what we have sort of been talking about, is trying to be aware of the light. This has nothing to really do with light, other than it was the middle of the day, and that's not the time I normally take pictures. So it's something to keep in mind. So here's another creative thing. So many of us who go into the forest, we take this picture. We've seen it before. It's been done a zillion times. Doesn't mean they're all good or that they couldn't be better. I like this one. This is one of my more favorite ones. Good scene contrast, good dynamic range. And it's an interesting set of lines. It's kind of airy. It has actually been licensed and used, so someone else felt that way. But I'm trying to tell a story. Well, this doesn't really tell a story about me being in the forest. This tells a story about me being in the forest. I'm still in my tent. So a lot of times, you know, oh yeah, that's really pretty, but how do I make it different? So backing up, getting back in the tent and doing a similar shot, I think helped make another picture. It's not better, but it's a different picture. And in my commercial world, see, this might be used by a magazine that was on camping or backpacking, and the other shot's just a pure nature shot. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you. You know, it can happen in the tropics a lot, but you take your camera out of your bag and you go to take a picture and it's all fogged. The whole lens is fogged, and you can't take a picture. You have to wait until the temperatures equalize inside the camera and lens. So as my camera and lens were equalizing, I kept picking it up and looking through it, and I'm saying, wow, this is like dropping a big soft focus filter over this thing. This is beautiful. So I started taking pictures with it, all fogged up, and eventually it went away. But I mean, in the film days, I spent a lot of money buying filters to do this. So it's something to keep in mind, taking advantage of those. Okay, standard scene, not very good. Kind of a cool little leaf on the rock, but you know, really, it's just not. You know, everybody's got it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't take it, but everybody's got it. So what about this? Well, that's a much more interesting picture, and that was just right down in a little eddy. So different lens, of course, but again, being aware of the reflection of the light. It's the light on the. So there was light over here on the hillside on the right. The sun was coming in. This is in the shade. The sun was going down, so only the stuff up on the hillside was lit. This is the hillside that's in the water, that's being reflected in the water. Okay, another kind of, it's late. I don't really go out into the desert in the middle of the day. So this is probably, 4 o'clock or something, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Just starting my walk around looking for rattlesnakes and horned lizards and stuff like that, and desert tortoises. And I came across this little patch of flowers. They're quite small, but it was like really windy. It's hard, can't tell here because I've had a high shutter speed, but it was really windy. So I couldn't really get any macro shots. So I said, well, what the heck? Why fight the wind? Let's just go with some slow shutter stuff. So I laid down on the ground and started moving the camera around to try accentuate that, and came up with a couple of kind of interesting pictures, artsy fartsy kind of things. But again, rather than get frustrated by the wind, or the light or something, maybe it's something that can, get you, because you're traveling. It's not like you may never come back to this place. So you got to kind of figure out how to get an image here that might work, that you might be able to share. So this is another Eastern Sierras shot. So it's out of Bishop. So we're driving up towards probably North Lake or South Lake or somewhere, driving along a road. The sun, it has gone behind the mountains, so it's in open shade. And the colors are pretty good, pretty nice. And so you have to be aware when you're driving. I mean, I don't want to say take your eyes off the road, but of course you're taking your eyes off the road because you're looking over at this stuff. And so in this scene, there's a picture that I saw as I drove. I actually passed it, turned around, came back, parked on that side of the road so that I could take the pictures. So you may have already figured out where the picture is, but it's right over here in the, just off of on the right side, just off of the center. It's that. So there was these red plants, and then of course the aspen tree, which was perfect. The aspen tree was perfect. So that's what caught my eye. So I got the big lens out, started taking pictures. Now this is in this is in open shade. So there's no direct sunlight on this. And I love the yellow blue. Yellow and blue are opposite colors. So they always will work well together because it's very bold. So I went back on another time and photographed the same place in the sun, and it doesn't work. So really all it is a change in light. So this doesn't work. So you see this on a sunny day and you say, I'm going to come back when that thing's in the shade. That's going to be pretty nice. It'll really bring those colors out and the rocks will be all blue. So again, that's kind of understanding about light, knowing the light. Here's another little sort of experiment. So this is actually in Montana. That's a salsify. It's like a giant dandelion. And I'm actually walking along the side of the road. I don't remember what I was looking for, and I saw it and I go, I know it's middle of the day, but you can do macro in the middle of the day. So I got my macro lens out and I got in really tight, and I made this picture. Now it's shaded. Okay. So a lot of times if I'm with somebody, I'll ask them because in this shot, see, it's in the sun. So I might ask somebody, hey, can you go stand over there and put shade on top of this? Or I'll carry a little diffusion thing that I can set up and provide shade. And I said, yeah, but there's been some famous photographers have taken this picture, and so this isn't going to compete with theirs. So I had to go further. So I just kept getting closer and closer with my macro lens. And I then brought in a gold reflector and bounced that through my diffuser to get this color. You could probably get this color in post if you wanted. This shot's been licensed several times. Okay, the limits of our tools. The camera, you have to remember, the camera is essentially a one-eyed box. It's not a stereo camera. It's one eye. It's only got one eye. It sees no depth at all. You have to create the depth with light and composition and everything. And it's a box. It puts a frame around our picture, okay? It's not like our brain and eyes. So we have to understand what it's capable of, and it has limited dynamic range. It certainly doesn't match the dynamic range that we see. So you have to understand what it's capable of in order to control it to get those pictures that you want. And modern cameras and modern processing software is really incredible at solving as many problems as it can, but it doesn't solve all the limitations of the tool. So the most common problem we have is scene contrast, the difference between the highlights and the shadows, okay? You really have to pick one or the other to make your exposure for, in most cases. In overcast situations, it's not a problem because there's not much difference. So you have to make your choice, and then you have to add stuff. You have to add light. So in this case, I had an off-camera flash set up on a little light stand, photograph again. And I know you're going, yeah, but when I travel, I'm not carrying all this stuff. Look, I've got a little folding light stand, one little, speed light, and you can really do magic with something like that. And I almost always now travel with somebody, my wife, and she holds the light for me all the time. So it's not that much of an effort. So this is a Portland Zoo, and the sun was coming through. So in the wintertime, the sun was coming through, backlighting the wolf. I just on camera flash, popped it in there. Not too bright. I didn't want to affect the background. This was shot on film. So there's really no digital manipulation whatsoever. This is with an LED light. So I was walking along the creek. This is in Big Sur, and this dragonfly had just come out of its, it just hatched out of its chrysalis. I think that's right. I'm not sure. But anyway, just came out, and it's drying its wings. I knew the wings were reflective. So because I can see the LED, the flash would have been really hard here, but I can see the LED, I could move it, because it's not going anywhere until it gets all the fluid pumped into its wings. I can move it, until I got the reflection. Click, click, click. Same kind of thing here. I knew the story I wanted to tell here, sort of the last amphibian kind of an idea. Set up my scene. I was in the shade, and set up my little flash on a little, one of those little, what do you call them? The little tripods with the little bally legs. Anyway, set my flash up over there. And then I had to actually go find salamanders. I always put them back. I find them, put them here, take the picture. As soon as they start wandering off, I might pick them up, do one more, and then go put them back in exactly the same place I found them.
Gorilla pod.
Gorilla pod, thank you. So desert tortoise, super important animal, highly endangered, big impacts from solar farms and wind farms. So this was part of a story about that. That was picked up. And this is a female in her den. She has, and I have on-camera flash fill. So it's the only way to balance that light. This is a little salamander again, Encetina salamander. And let me show you the setup for this. So it's totally dark here. There's absolutely no sunshine at all. It's totally covered in shade. Here it is. It's next to my tent. And if you look down in the lower third on top of that log, you'll see that little patch of moss that's fruiting. Okay. And so I set up two lights, two speed lights, and that's where my camera was, where my tripod was. And I took this picture. So again, I mean, it took me an hour for sure. And I got several pictures that actually worked with this. So adding light, you can actually create full on sunlight. If you understand you need a little backlighting, maybe a little fill. It doesn't take much effort. And now with LEDs, you can see the light. And I'm pretty much, if it's not moving very fast, I'm pretty much using LEDs now. Kind of this is a little bit older shot. I had done this on film before too, but again, it's dusk, sunset, and you're just gelling. This was with a flash. You're gelling the flash, side lighting to create the shadows so you get the texture, and you're making a story. And you can do it in post. So when I took this picture, I knew exactly what I wanted to do in post. I could have done this with a handheld light or something, but I said, it's going to be so easy to do in Lightroom. And I use Lightroom 95% of the time. I very seldom use Photoshop. So I just popped a little dodging and burning. So burn some areas down, dodge some areas, just like in the darkroom. This made the image much better. Shadows, how are we doing? I got about 5 minutes here. Okay. So shadows are critical. Sometimes shadows in a scene are what catch my eye first, and that's why I think the scene might work. So I was obviously photographing. This is a very well photographed place. I was just sitting there for a while, and after the sun started coming up and stuff, I noticed people were walking behind me, which was very polite of them. And I saw the shadows going across. So I just waited for somebody to get into the right. I didn't tell them what to do or anything. And it's not luck because I was waiting. But same thing here. I like the shadows of the trees coming towards me. So I did not use focus stacking here. I used F16. So light and shadows in combination define the mood of a scene. So this has got a lot of dodging and burning in it. So I dodged the pathway going up into the trees. I dodged the one tree over the fallen log. I burned the areas down in the water. So it's just like being in the darkroom. It's really enjoyable to do it this way. But otherwise, it's totally flat light. It's totally overcast. There's yes, there's shadowed area and light areas, but they're not very distinct. So by doing dodging and burning, Ansel Adams stuff, you can create the mood that he created in his images. So shadows can be strong or weak. So that's pretty strong. These are strong shadows. This is right here off our coast. And low tide, got a beautiful sunset. And the water is what's creating the highlights in the foreground. If there was no water there, this wouldn't work at all because there wouldn't be any shadows really. I mean, there's no light. If you don't have light, then you don't have that shadow. Or the shadows can be really weak, but or literally no shadows at all. But there's always a difference in tones in subject matters, lighter subjects, darker subjects. And you can use that to sort of emulate light and shadow. That's what I did here. And here. I didn't want too many shadows in this shot because then, it wouldn't be as well camouflaged. This is a horned lizard. Okay, I've got just like 6 or 7 more pictures. Are we good to finish up?
I think we're fine. We've been less than an hour and we didn't start right on time, so take your time.
Okay, because what I want to talk about now is light painting. Photographing at night, which has become very popular with the digital cameras. And it's really quite fascinating what we can do compared to what I was able to do in the past with analog. So I got inspired about light painting from this gentleman, Winston Link. And this was taken in 1956. And it was taken with a 4x5 view camera and 43 flash bulbs. All what you can see the flash bulbs in the picture. You can see 2 black dots over by the telephone pole. Those are 2 of his lights. There's another one over by the front of the train and everything. So he had 43 bulbs wired to fire in a series as the train came. So it's pitch black out, and he's got, of course, other lights lighting the cars, lighting the people. The screen is on, the drive-in movie screen's on, and he's got that sort of all balanced with his flash bulbs. And then he opens the shutter, and all the bulbs start going off, and he gets this picture. I'm going, this is absolutely incredible. And then I found a guy, Eric Curie, who's a modern photographer, and he's written a wonderful book on light painting. And he is truly a master of light painting. So you can look him up online, Eric Curry, Curry. And so I started going out and experimenting with this painting with light. So this is 8 different exposures. So in this one, I am using flash. I'm now using LEDs. In this one, I'm using flash. So you may or may not be, I'm sure someone at the club has come and talked about light painting and everything. So you go around, you make separate exposures with the lighting what you want. You can use a flashlight and just paint it, move it. And then you put it together in post. It's not difficult to do. Eric Curry shows you how he does it in Photoshop. So, but what I got from Eric Curry and from Winston was, you know, yeah, the technique's pretty amazing, but you still got to make a picture that means something, that tells a story, that's, you know, that relates to people, rather than just going, wow, how'd you do that? I needed to get beyond that. So this is my camp, and you know, I had my wife sit there with the fire. This was one of my early ones, and there's certainly a few things that I'd maybe do a little bit differently now, but it tells a story about the van and the camping and all that kind of stuff. So it worked. So as I got a little bit more sophisticated with it, I started sketching my light painting. So I had this idea that I wanted to light a forest. I wanted to light the whole forest in my frame. And I actually did this alone. I didn't have any help. I would have preferred to have had help with this. But so I sat down, I went up at dusk, and I sat down and I had a pad, and I framed my scene with my camera, and I'm going to leave my camera there, and then go back to camp, eat dinner, and come back when it's pitch black. And I do take my first series of pictures then, because I can underexpose the forest and get the sky, get that detail there. And I draw pictures of the frame, and then where I need to stand to light the trees. The circles and X's are trees, okay? So then I come back pitch black, okay? Because remember, it's multiple exposures. So I have one exposure that I took earlier in the evening, and that gave me my ambient shadow exposure. That's why it doesn't look pitch black. If you look over to the right, though, along that trail, you see that that was never lit by that earlier exposure, and that's pitch black. And I left this one in so that you can see the light reflecting off the water. But you can see how I'm pointing my light. Again, you can do this with a flashlight, LED, or flash. And I'm lighting the sides of trees. So then I did another one, okay, same time, but then I didn't use that ambient exposure. And now it's truly looks like night. So you can see the lights a lot better, and the effects of the lights on the subject. The one trick I found to doing this was don't front light. don't even come close to front lighting. You need to backlight and side light everything. Front lighting just killed the depth and dimension I was looking for. So it was, you know, for a first try, I was pleased. It was rather successful on a first try. Certainly different scenes would require different approaches. And then there's some really cool rocks in Alabama Hills. And I got one of my students to stand there. The flashlight beam is in post. That part of it's post because it was too dim. But everything else is lit. This is 5 exposures. And this one's 9 exposures. And the moon was up. So the moon lit Mount Whitney. Okay. Actually, that's not Mount Whitney. That's Lone Pine Peak. Lone Pine Peak over on the right. And these 2 rocks are the same. I love this rock. So 9 exposures here. So it takes quite a bit of time. Okay, there's a photographer that I follow that, you know, his name's Jim Richardson. I've met him a couple times, talked to him, spent some time with him. He's a National Geographic shooter. Incredible man. And he said, if you want to take better pictures, stand in front of more interesting things. And I've taken that to heart. Not that I won't shoot, some people might consider mundane, but then I have a job to make it look interesting. But really, if you go and search for things that are interesting, your pictures will be interesting. So this rock with this crack is very interesting. That's it.
All
Oh,
right.
goodness.
Ralph, I see one of our participants, Ken, has raised hands. I would love to take a little opportunity to facilitate some question and answer. So Ken, do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask a question?
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Ralph. It was an amazing presentation.
Oh,
I,
thank you
I,
very much.
oh, you're welcome. I do have one question about one of your early images where you showed some very distinctive light rays coming through a redwood forest. And I think you had said something like your camera can't or doesn't know how to expose this automatically properly.
Right.
And I'm wondering how you did that. Do you do a lot of bracketing, or what sort of rules of thumb or advice do you have for getting that right?
Well, with digital, well, first of all, I come from a background of photographing with transparency film from slides. And with slides, you always had to expose for the highlights. You always, because otherwise they'd be totally blown out. Whereas with with slides, you would tend to underexpose things a little bit just for that reason. You shouldn't underexpose it. Negatives are the opposite. So with digital, digital cameras have gotten so good with dynamic range that the only thing you really have to be careful of now is overexposing important highlights. So, because then you can't recover it. We can pretty well get anything out of our shadows within reason. But so the exposure there has to be based on the beam. And if you'll notice in the beam, can I put my screen back up?
I'm sorry, I was just talking while muted. We should be able to get it up.
Okay. So you're talking about this picture here, right?
That's the one.
Okay. So you see, if you look on this main beam in the middle, you'll notice that it's very bright up there in the upper third of the picture, and then it gets darker and darker and darker. The beam does as it goes down. Okay, so it's kind of like a sunset, you know? I don't want to expose for the actual sun because that makes everything around it black. So I don't want to actually expose to get detail in that brightest part of the beam. So all of us have spot meters, and you could use a spot meter here for sure in your camera. You come down to about, you're looking for a midtone. You come down a little ways, so about the middle of that beam, you meter that right there, meter that, set your, I use manual, you know, I set my shutter speed in f-stop, and I don't use auto ISO for stuff like this. So I set that, and I'm good. I can kind of point it anywhere in my scene with any lens, and that exposure is going to stay pretty much the same because the situation's not changing. The sun's not getting any brighter. So your camera doesn't know what to do with this. It'll try to average it, and it'll probably might get kind of close, but that depends on your composition, you know, because you know you have a matrix metering or center weighted metering, and so your composition has a lot to do with what it's metering. If it's too low, it's going to open up the shadows too much. If it's too high, it's going to stop down too much. But it's the zone system, you know. It's this whole thing of kind of understanding what your camera wants to do, and really, it's an experiment. So I don't auto bracket. That just, the only reason why I don't auto bracket is that I learned how to take pictures with film, and every time I pushed the button, it was 25 cents. I couldn't afford to auto bracket. You can do it with it, you know. So you just take your first picture. You're so excited, you just take your first picture and you look at it on the back, and you say, okay, I gotta stop down a little bit from what my meter's telling me to do. I want those beams to stand out. So you're trying to build contrast here. You want your shadows to go pretty black, and you want your light rays to look like that's what the light rays look like. You know, they were bright at the top and then they got darker, and that's what you're trying to capture. You can certainly go in and post and finagle with that just a little bit, you know, but I'm never going to be able to capture anything out of that brightest area, but I don't care. That's not the subject. So you have to base your exposure on what the subject is. That's what it looked like to me. So I actually didn't change my exposure much at all for the next 30, 40 pictures. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's so helpful.
So I see that Stuart has raised his hand. Anyone else that wants to do questions, if you can use the raise hand function in the participants window, or just unmute yourself and ask when we get a break. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, hi, Ralph. I was
Hi.
just curious if you use HDR very often. Like I've used it, and normally I set it for 2 steps over, 2 steps under, and right on. But I find the dynamic range of my camera is just as good. So I just wondered how you deal with that.
Yeah, I don't use the HDR. I'm shooting RAW, by the way. So I don't use an automatic HDR function because HDR is something I generally use for landscapes. I might use it for a food shop, but they're not moving. You know, things aren't moving.
Right.
So I usually have some time to just change my exposure. But I will do that quite often in landscapes. Make an exposure for the foreground, exposure for the sky. Maybe sometimes that's all I need. And then in Lightroom, it's got an automated HDR thing. Sometimes that works. Sometimes I go into Photoshop and maybe do a little masking or something. But it's not, I definitely use it. I definitely do. Whether you have it as an automated setup or not. Like for instance, this picture here, you could do HDR here easily. That would be your bright shot. And then you could open it up and, you know, obviously if the person moves, which they probably would, you know, you'd have to go into Photoshop and mask that area off. So, but, you know, I'm just using a flash. And you couldn't get this in HDR. You know, you couldn't get this picture in HDR because look at the lighting direction.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Can't do that.
Yeah.
So there's a difference. You know, all these techniques and tools are designed to solve the same problem, but they all do it in a different way.
Yeah. Okay.
I have George Wellick has a question. I just wanted to, before we do that, note that I know our board knows about this, but Ralph has opted to use the honorarium that we pay for presenters to join the club for the rest of this year and next year. And so while we have an audience here, and Ralph, next week's Fourth Tuesday program is going to include some images and discussion of technique about painting with light from Stuart Wilson's recent travels.
Great.
George, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Ralph. It was wonderful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
One of your shots there, I think it was of a black bear, was taken in the rain. And you did a really nice job of capturing the raindrops. I've tried to do this many times and I always seem to fail miserably. What is the secret to the shutter speed or whatever to get those drops?
Well, it's definitely a little bit slower shutter speed because you can see the raindrops are streaking.
Yes.
But the key to seeing the rain is to have shadowed areas in the background.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't even see the rain against a sky, or in this case, like the water down below, you don't even see the rain down there.
Right. Do you have any recollection of what approximately what sort of shutter speed this would be?
Let's see. Let's see. How can I do that with this double screen? You know, I'm gonna guess that it was probably in the 15th, 8th of a second, 30th, maybe somewhere somewhere in there.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
only because it wouldn't be much slower because that bear is moving.
Yeah, that's the other key part of it.
Yeah. But I was in the Amazon. It was raining all the time down there, and I actually spent a fair amount of time just photographing rain, and seeing what worked and what didn't work. You can use higher shutter speeds as long as it's against a darker background. Like for drops in a puddle or a pond, using a higher shutter speed is pretty cool.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else with questions?
I have a question. I can't find my little hand signal, but here's my hand. Ralph, you were talking about that one image with all the green in it. You were talking about the green, and it has this green light that puts out, and that photographing people makes everything green. And I've experienced that. And do you have hints about what if you're stuck with that photograph, how you
Yeah.
counteract the green on the people's skin?
Okay, well, I'm gonna bring this up because if you add light, if you get your flash out, put a little soft box on it, and have somebody hold it over there to light the person's not going to be green.
Okay.
Okay, because this isn't going through the green. This light's not going through the green leaves. Okay.
Oh, great.
So it's just going to be this light. Other than that, I mean, we used to throw maybe a 30 magenta on there. So that's something you would do in post. You could actually in Lightroom, you could take your painting tool, and make the color magenta. Magenta cancels green.
Uh-huh.
And so make it a light magenta and just brush it over their face. And that'll probably get rid of the green cast.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else with questions for Ralph? All right. Well, hearing no more, Ralph, thank you so much for an inspiring presentation and a chance to see some of your beautiful work. And we look forward to having you participate with the club and being around. So to everybody, oh, Judith Barrett has a question.
Okay.
I do. Ralph, do you give any workshops?
I'll start by saying I don't. It depends. It kind of depends on the situation and the subject. I'm certainly, as we can start to socialize again. I was a big part of the critter demos, the small animal photography things, and I know the clubs participated in that. But I certainly don't mind going out with people and doing photography and sharing, questions and answers and things. I don't mind doing that at all. I actually had talked to Bill a little bit about this. I know you've got people in the club who know Lightroom really well and know cataloging and all that kind of stuff. So I used to teach that at Brooks, but I think you guys have those types of, I wouldn't mind doing a thing on Lightroom, the way I do it or something like that. So I think as we move forward, my participation in the club might include some small informal workshops. It's just that I don't want to, I'm retired. So you got to remember, I retired of 33 years of teaching at Brooks and innumerable field workshops all over the world. So I'm trying to not have to put so much time into those kinds of things, but I go take pictures. So if people want to come and take pictures with me, then certainly that kind of workshop, absolutely no problem. So let me know what you're interested in.
All right. Anyone else? Well, once again, thank you all for coming and giving some time on Tuesday, and thank you, Ralph. We'll end the meeting and see you back here in a week for Fourth Tuesday.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.